you who don't know me, I'm Bruce Schechter, and I am the lead. There are quite a few. So, I am the leader of the steering committee of the Intel Alumni Network. For what that's worth. Maybe later we'll introduce the whole steering committee. Let me say, first of all, we've been in existence for about a little over a year and a half, and up till now, in our growth mode, all of our events were purely social. We got together and drank wine and enjoyed each other's presence, which is great. But a few months ago, we thought about maybe we would try to do something like a real professional network and take on a professional topic. And we really didn't know how much interest there would be, but as you'll see, I mean, clearly there was interest. We reached out to find people who had been active in new careers post-Intel in clean tech, and frankly, by the time the number of choices of panelists was overwhelming. Half of the people sitting in the room probably could be panelists. So anyway, I'm glad it's turned out. So let me tell you. Well, first, let me do some. I want to knock off some housekeeping. Obviously, we'd like all of you to turn off your cell phones. And beware, I mean, if you need to go for a restroom, you'll go out the back door there and hang left, and you'll find it down the hallway. Also beware, we are recording you on video here tonight. So the exact usage of the video we're literally working on as we speak. But nobody stand up and say, "You lie." Not good. Let's see. So, and another more than important housekeeping item is that we want to thank Applied Materials. Mike Splinter, and who I don't think is here anymore, but and John Antone, who you'll see on the panel later. And all of the support crew who's helping us put this on. We really appreciate that. Let me tell you about the lineup. We're going to have Andy, of course, here to speak momentarily. And let me just tell you very briefly, Andy and John Miner arranged a meeting a relatively small meeting of ex-Intel people that actually ran all afternoon this afternoon on a related topic. And it's a very serious discussion of the energy issue. And Andy, and I don't want to take words out of Andy's mouth, so he will be talking about that. But that was kind of an origination of how, by the way, we happen to be here at Applied Materials to host our event. So following Andy, we'll have a panel, again, of ex-Intel people who are active in clean tech. And the origination of that was we just wanted to get perspectives, like what was it about what you did at Intel that led you to what you do now? And how can Intel skills be applicable, and more importantly, just where's it all going? So anyway, now at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker. I thought about reeling off the long biography for the speaker, and then I realized most of you probably could reel off a large part of it from memory. And I have to say, I'm just incredibly honored, because this is a person who, I don't know who in the room wouldn't agree, this is a person who shaped our lives in some way along the way.
Okay. That was nice, Bruce, I think. The particular part that shaped your life was the sign-in sheet. So, like Bruce explained, we had a meeting of ex-Intel people who are now, quote, energy experts. They are all retired, and possibly they could be described by another name. So we conducted a discussion about the future of the United States from an energy standpoint. This does have some problems. One of the problems is that we are not in charge of anything. And that's on the scale of what the issues we are going to be talking about is a little bit of a handicap. The second problem is a huge industry. When you put up the industry that we all grew up in, the information technology industry, computers, semiconductors, software, and all that, it's $1 trillion revenue. Different aspects of processing energy. But at the centerpiece of it is an issue that I think shapes its significance for the United States and each of us and the world at large. And that is that there's not going to be enough energy resource available to allow all people in the world to live at the energy determined level of prosperity that the United States is used to. So either they will satisfy themselves living at half of some fraction of the energy level that we live, or we will voluntarily lower ourselves correspondingly, or there's going to be a competition by increasing the rough means. There is no stopping this. Whether we are going to run out of oil this year, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, 20 years from now, the emergence of the Asian economies represents a growing demand, and the collision between distributing that shortfall between them and us is going to shape the defining issues of the next decade between us and China. In case you think I'm making this up, probably you still recognize the Semlot clock when you see it. A straight line on a Semlot clock is a fast growth. And the slope is steep, like the China slope is. It usually indicates rapid change coming your way, and when that green line reaches the US blue line, this is going to be inside the next 5 years, we have not reached the level I'm talking about because China is a lot bigger. So that line has to go further simply by scaling the population density. So this is not looking good. The particular part that I want to focus on, which is where the rubber hits the road first, is the transportation industry. The reason for that is the transportation industry requires liquid petroleum. Other industries can live with different means of energy. I have a fairly complicated schematic showing the distribution of different forms of energy in different segments of the market. From the bottom comes the source of energy. The top are the different industrial, different consuming sectors, including transportation. We're not going to get into the US military and environmental movement and their impact on that, but that's not pertinent to the point. What is pertinent to the point is that dashed line in the middle that separates the transportation industry energy use from the others. And you see that petroleum and agri-fuels can cross that line and go to the residential. Am I moving the picture, my mirror image? Moving into the residential and industrial sector and be used, but nothing for all practical purposes other than petroleum and agri-fuels can be used in the transportation industry. And that says that any shortfall, the impact of any shortfall will be magnified. The movement for electricity, use of electricity in transportation is justified by this consideration alone. You increase the availability of other sources of energy in transportation, and you diminish the exposure and the vulnerability of the transportation segment. Don't think of going on a holiday in the car. Think of your food and your medicines and everything coming to you. If you convert all of those sources of energy to electricity. So one might consider the SLRP for the US economy coming up with a simple statement describing job one. I picked up a drug E at a bargain price. But in that verse, drug E aside is serious. We need electric cars, we need batteries, we need solar, we need smart connections to and from the grid, storage, on and on and on. And we need coal, by the way. We need coal because coal is a very large portion of the energy used. And wishing it away is wishing you back into the Stone Age. But most importantly, what you need for this electric conversion is an electric car. And the electric car is a very simple device. It's batteries with wheels. The complexities of building an internal combustion engine are left behind. You're starting from a clean sheet of paper, and everything is going to be good so long as your battery is good, and goodness is defined as inexpensive, lasts, and reliable, and all that. So we have a lot of problems with this. We have a disadvantage in not having been in the battery business for handheld electronics, which obviously gave a start to the other companies. We also have a disadvantage in that we think manufacturing is an old-fashioned activity. And why bother with that when we can go and become a PC? There is another issue that is actually as hard as all of those that impede us from getting into this area or any of the other problems that we have to deal with electricity introduction, coal purification, all of those things. And I have borrowed a phrase from the presidential campaign and modified it a little to avoid copyright infringement. And that is that we are on a road to nowhere. And incidentally, as a testimonial to that, that was the date on a Monday. The way technology emerges is commonly assumed as an innovation event or process taking place, which incidentally will save our economy. And then the Schlemiel will manufacture it. It's a little more complicated. It's true that invention has to take place. It is true that you need the free market allocating capital to the large-scale manufacturing to saturate your target market with the new technology. But it's also true that there is a very, very difficult middle phase that I call translation and scaling phase, where the technology is new, its economic value is unproven, and everything is very difficult. That scaling phase is where the innovation tends to get bogged down, and money is being spent, and people use every means to survive, and most of the time that is to license it out to somebody else. Let me illustrate that, how this looks like in terms of time scale and who does these things, and in terms of how much cycles each of these phases in the cycle cost. When we develop a new microprocessor, a new drug, a new anything in the invention process, it's an R&D, VC funded, it's a lab funded, and it's typically engine processor costs about $500 million. Pretty good example. It's a $1 billion range. Translation and scaling sufficiently that it would reach the size of market, that market economics and return on investment and all the tools of capitalism can allow society to do the right thing, comes after you have 10% of the market reach with the new technology. That phase itself, the middle phase, is a 10-year phase. It's a $10 billion kind of number, and there's no mechanism. Either most of the corporations, particularly since most of the corporations have given up on internal R&D and internal manufacturing in the US, there's no market that is efficient for that. So very few of them make it from the first phase to the last one, which is very expensive, but it doesn't matter at that point, because there you know that people want the product and the product works, so you pay for it and it works out. That middle scale has kept drugs from reaching the marketplace, caused the pharmaceutical and biotech industry to undergo a maddening merger to somehow solve that problem. It caused companies to go out of business, or go from the first phase, the business of going from the first phase to the last. And everywhere there is somebody sitting on the outside looking for value to be degraded and ready to swoop in and pick it up cheap. That is what is the ultimate obstacle in us dealing with any aspect of the electric car, removing carbon from coal, or any of the energy problems. And unless we address this problem, we're going to be dealing with transfer of technology to China on the cheap. That is my uplifting message. Bruce? Right. Do I?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, go.
We're open for questions for Andy, and if you're going to ask a question, we'd love if you use the mic.
Can I move around? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the comparison to the pharmaceutical industry?
Comparison to what?
You were just talking about the pharmaceutical
Yeah.
industry, the pipeline of drugs and like how does that compare to what you're describing?
Very similar, actually.
Repeat the question,
I had
please.
some examples of it.
I was asking to compare it to the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I should repeat the question. A drug development, typically, the physical development, the invention is $100 million. And early clinical trials are included in that. Before you can go into the market, be it a vaccine, which H1N1 has to be scaled in a very large volume, or an anti-inflammatory, where if you watch what happened to COX-2 inhibitors, legal judgment, years and years after the thing was in the market, you are basically expected to ensure zero defect, high volume product into a population that is highly diverse. Each of us are different. To do that, the testing requirements are extremely expensive, time consuming, and the number that you mentioned, $100 million, that takes like multiple hundreds. And some of them don't work, maybe most of them don't. So when you count the cost of those that made it through, you have to apply the cost that you spend, the sum that you spent on those that did not make it through. And the Oxford drug today, by different estimates, is between $1.5 to $2.5 billion to go through that process. Before you start manufacturing, it actually is not that. If you needed to go into the semiconductor industry, you were not a participant in it, you would absolutely go through this whole thing. Steve?
First of all, I seem to recall that when I gave presentations to you, if I'd stopped on this foil without having the solutions for it, I would have had my head handed to me.
And you're left in a hot.
That's right, but I'm back. So, as you were putting this presentation together and in your observation, other than getting American industry to grow up, have you thought about ways to change this conundrum?
Actually, I did not imply that American industry is to grow up. I don't think that is the first step. I think the answer to the second phase is technically savvy, courageous, and consistent governmental policy. I can't do anything about that. But one thing that I would expect you to do as a SLRP presentation, or you would expect me to do as a SLRP presentation, is to state the problem as clearly and as understandably and without flinching, so that if you come up with a solution, you come up with a solution to the right problem. That's the part that I'm trying to work really one audience at a time or one article at a time. This story is not told. Back at our alma mater, the thing that we never polished or looked through is the competitive realities. And I particularly felt that the only way we can have a value system and a behavioral system that is right for the occasion, if you know the reality, and reality rarely results in a cheerleading contest, which results in pretty shitty pictures like this. Then you may do the hard things, come in at 8 o'clock and do all those things. Put up with being mistreated at Momars to avoid that.
It's a good answer. You don't have to do a resort.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
The competitive nature of the natural resources for lithium and magnesium and all kinds of great batteries is a problem that has been coming up. China has a lot of lithium. You know, are we trading one problem for another where our resources to do batteries are not there? No?
China does not have particular quarter lithium. Brazil does. Brazil and Argentina do. And they are already licking their chops, and as soon as they started licking their chops, lithium deposits are discovered everywhere. And among other things, at a lower concentration and some amount of extra processing costs, it's in the seawater. And by the time it's going to get processed, the chemistry that we use in batteries will change, because it has been changing every 2-3 years anyway. And it's hard to conceive a battery that needs elements that are not in the periodic table. It doesn't go into the atmosphere, it stays where it is, and some cost. You can take the old batteries and recondition the raw materials. Yeah. Bruce, you keeping time?
Yes.
Okay.
You mentioned lithium. I mean, there's environmental degradation issues with some of these extraction and production, so it's not just a matter of the fact that they're everywhere and they can actually be extracted, but the actual cost in the countries where you're speaking of in Brazil. I mean, the issues with lithium various chemicals that are being used in the Prius causing pollution in Canada. So, I mean, what's your thought in terms of the actual socioeconomic, or actually more social impacts of these extractions?
The only way I can really address that is by impartial and objectively prepared comparative environmental damage statement per kilowatt hour, per BTU, whatever, of different forms of energy. No source of energy can be created without impact on the environment, impact on the manufacturing process, impact on the neighborhood. And when I put the environment, remember that arrow on the right of the environmental forces, essentially nothing can be done in the United States as a practical matter that is of any size without running into the so-called NIMBY objection. People don't want propeller. Solar so far has escaped, but I'm trying to keep the Russian football on my roof before the planning committee will outlaw it. We have to rethink this, because one of the environmental impacts of inaction is we don't get to eat. And if we don't explain that that is coming until after it is upon us, we're going to have a very angry and very highly energized population that's going to turn on us. Back to my comment to Steve.
Let's take one more question, and Hans is waving his hand over here, so I'm going to let him.
And if you say that governmental policy is the only way out of that...
Very conservative on your sweaters.
All of us are maturing, right? If governmental policy is the only way out of that, aren't you saying it is the road to China? Because I don't see any Western European or US government being able to come up with any meaningful policy on anything.
Mr. Nussheim, would you tell him what I would have said to that in a
It's a mixed audience here.
You know, it's a big problem. It's bigger than any industry or any industrial participant. We expect our government to save us from meteors hitting us, from wars, from flu strains. I had nowhere to look. I could go to church or to the government.
Let's see. So the panelists are going to introduce themselves, and I want to rapidly let them do that. But first, I feel sorry for everybody up here because everybody's name is either Rob or John, possibly except for Chip, who were And so there are two people I'm going to call out briefly before they start. One is Rob Enderle of the Enderle Group, who is so kind to come here and act as the moderator. Rob is not an Intel alumni, but as most of you know, his wife is an Intel alumni, Mary Enderle. And that, in many ways, was the origination of this whole thing. So thank you very much, Rob. And another interesting one is John Skinner, who is not an Intel alumni because he's still at Intel. Probably the only person in the room. But by the way, we have an active discussion with several people at Intel about the possibility of some formalized relationship between Intel Corporation and this community. And so here's an example of us behaving like we think they should. So go ahead, Rob.
Well, thank you and good evening. I'd like to start by thanking Andy Grove for scaring the crap out of me twice in one day, and also showing me how you can make ex-Intel executives sweat. That was kind of amazing. As we look out at Green and start chatting about it, I was thinking about my own personal experience with Green. And a few years back when Jimmy Carter was president, there were two sides to my family, the side that had money and the side that didn't. And I was unfortunately on the wrong side. And the side that had money, I had 4 second cousins, and 2 of them decided to invest in green tech because Jimmy Carter was very pro-green. He was putting solar panels in the White House. One of them decided to take, and each one of them had 7-figure endowments from their parents, something that I envied at the time. One of them decided to invest his $1 million endowment into women and fast cars. And the only woman of the group decided to buy a going family business. Well, Jimmy Carter was out, Reagan was in. The 2 members that invested in green tech were selling real estate by the end of that particular session. The rich side of the family was no longer the rich side of the family. My family was now the rich side of it, its relative. And it just kind of goes to show, as long as something has to be, at least the lesson for me was, as long as something has to be subsidized by government, you were at the whims of government. And so towards the end of the term, you want to make sure that you're well hedged. In looking at green and kind of a taxonomy of green, and you're hearing a lot about the first. In fact, most of the panel is expert on the first, which is energy conservation. There are actually 2 other parts of green to be thinking about. One is the part that has to do with recycling materials and keeping hostile chemicals out of the environment. The reason that that's kind of important, of course, is that's really what kind of sustains the race. If we destroy our environment, it doesn't matter how much energy we have, we're still pretty much dead. And the last one is management. And that's where the key part comes in, because that allows you to balance the first 2. Because if you're not doing things intelligently, if you focus exclusively on conserving the environment, then chances are you're not going to have power to turn on the lights. And if you focus exclusively on turning on the lights and making them bright, as I mentioned before, you're probably going to pollute the environment to a degree. I mean, kind of look at China. It's a lot of power, not a lot of conservation. You can't breathe there. So it's a point to think about all 3 phases. 1 is energy, 2 is protecting the environment with regard to watching the hostile chemicals and making sure they're safe. And then the 3rd is management, making sure that you can balance the first against the second and coming up with a kind of a logical decision that keeps you alive. I belong to the Lifeboat Foundation, which is another group that scares me regularly. The latest thing is being concerned about the Russians sending out a message in space saying, hey, we're here and we want to meet all you aliens, because we've known from history that a high-tech race running into a low-tech race does really wonderful things to low-tech race. We tried to get the Aztecs to come in and explain that to us, but unfortunately none of them are still alive. So if you ever check it out, Lifeboat Foundation is quite a bit of fun. I'm going to ask my panel to introduce themselves, if you would, as you go through your name, when you were at Intel, for how long, what you did there, what you're doing now, and why you like green tech. And I will coach you if you get any one of those 4 questions, because there are 4 to remember.
So I'll go first. My name's John Skinner, and I'm still at Intel. I'm the one token Intel here. So I guess I'm an Intel alumnus in training. But seeing how much fun you all have, maybe I'll get there soon. But my current role at Intel is as the marketing director for the Eco-Technology Group, which I helped start up. We formed about 1.5 years ago inside of Intel. Before that, I was on the team that helped start up the relationship with Apple. I also started up our Software Alliances group about 10 years ago, did enterprise marketing for a couple of years, and spent 15 years in the field. So kind of add all that up, that's 25 years at Intel this month, and it's been a great ride so far, but I'd be happy to share what I've learned about seeing Intel move from a kind of a blue company to an increasingly green company and creating opportunities for people like me.
How did you get interested?
I had my epiphany, I guess, about 2 or 3 years ago. And, when I began to realize that the scientific community was coming together with pretty much a consensus about, the human impact on climate change, despite my political leanings, I began to realize that this was a serious problem. And so I became pretty passionate about the environment and began communicating that to some of the people I work with inside of Intel, and was part of the team that helped start to move some of our business efforts in this direction. So I'm still all about making money, but I think there's an opportunity to harness technology in ways that can both solve environmental problems and also be profitable.
Make a difference. Rob?
I'm Rob Siegel. I'm a general partner at Intel, at Exceed Capital. One of those highly thought of industries that Andy just talked about. In my time at Intel, I was there in the mid-90s, and I worked in 2 groups. I worked in DPG and in the predecessor at Intel Capital, Corporate Business Development. I got interested in green tech after 9/11 for entirely selfish reasons, like all good Republicans. Complete selfish pig, and believe that the best thing in the interest of our country is the fact that we can have energy independence. And if you look at it from a behavioral perspective, whether one is from the left or from the right, people are all doing the same things for whatever their motivations are, saving the planet or trying to ensure security, whatever the case may be. And our fund invests in breakthrough technologies that come out of major universities and national labs. One of the things that we have in this country is an unbelievable higher education system, and the quality of research and work going on there right now boggles the mind, and the types of breakthrough inventions that are coming out are just fascinating. And so I'm hopeful and believe that with the right infrastructure, and if we can get to that question mark solved in Andy's middle column, we'll be able to innovate our way out and do the right thing for the country and potentially even the planet.
That would be great, John.
Rob, I kind of forgot where I was too, and I heard Knox Time and Andy exchange I thought I was at ESM. Brought back some fond memories. I am John Miner. I worked at Intel for 22 years. Left 4 years ago. My last job at Intel was running Intel Capital. Prior to that, I did things like make motherboards and servers and a few other new business ventures that we got in and out of at various points in time. Now I'm one of those venture cap. The world is flat was never written. We were flattening the world. And every time I went over there, I was always amazed by the lust and the passion and the energy that these emerging economies had for a lifestyle like ours. And when gasoline hit $4 a gallon, it occurred to me that there wasn't enough gasoline, and there wasn't enough food, and there wasn't enough, 2x4s. There weren't enough Douglas firs in the Northwest or redwoods in California or whatever for these people to have houses and drive cars and all of these things that they aspire to have. And that meant that we were going to have this pretty massive substitution in the way things were done. Just economically driven. I was clearly more like Rob, much more motivated by the economic arguments that there's not enough resources, therefore there's going to be consequences, and we have to deal with those consequences. And so that's what got me really interested. I invest in clean tech companies, in a sustainable economy that includes green building materials, sustainable agriculture, clean air, and clean water. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunities to participate in the transition that's going to take place as the world economy switches from one way of doing things to another way, out of necessity.
Chip, you're the confusing one because you should be named Rob in sequence, but.
Oh, well. So I'm Chip Krauskopf. I joined Intel as an NCG, and if you don't remember what that term meant, it was new college graduate. I think it got renamed later. I was originally on the 386 microprocessor design team, worked for 486 and a number of chipset and CPU development efforts thereafter. Spent my time in the comms group, and when I left Intel, I was running worldwide customer support for all the embedded products. After leaving Intel, actually, I did some soul searching, and to answer one of your questions, and after looking at some wireless companies and other sorts of startups, I really came to the conclusion I wanted to be in the clean tech space, because that's where my passions were. I was a lifelong environmentalist, and every day you read the papers about glaciers melting and other problems, and really thought, I want to make a difference in helping solve those problems for my children. I want to be part of the solution, not be one of the people my kids point out and saying, you screwed up the planet, look at the mess you're leaving us. So I got involved and was at 2 clean tech companies. The first was Greenvolts, a utility scale solar company. And the second is a company I helped start called Chromosome. We're doing a rooftop solar concentrator. Just at the perfect timing to see the whole market fall out. I think I pitched both of these guys unsuccessfully, which is why I found the startup thing not quite all the success that Andy had at Intel many years ago. So now I'm actually doing, I'm director of development for the Clean Tech Open. We're a nonprofit that helps create clean tech entrepreneurs. We do a lot of workforce training, and so far we've helped 125 companies get going. They've cumulatively raised about $130 million from the private markets, have created over 500 jobs.
And last but not least, John.
John Antone. I actually started at Intel also as an RCG, the renamed acronym, 23 years ago, where I was there for 22 years. I left Intel a year ago, so 23 years ago. I actually worked on a product very early on called Wildcard. An old friend named Dirk Smits was running there. Dirk was running around. Very few people remember that, but it does have this very long legacy associated with it. After that, I worked in sales, but then I worked for Steve in the mobile group for a long time. And that was before going over to Asia and running Intel Japan and then Intel APAC the last 5 years. So I've seen firsthand the changes that Andy talked about in China, specific to energy, but in a broader sense across a number of economic development issues. I got interested a couple of years ago in the green space, and in knowing Mike Sprinter from before, he started working on me to come over to help out with applied materials, new venture into the solar business. And so now I'm responsible for doing all the marketing that we have in the energy and environmental space, most notably the solar space, but we also do equipment to do coated glass, so low emissions. We do equipment that's about to launch for LEDs, so we're going to turn off a lot of the electricity required to light things, and ultimately we'll do equipment that helps get us into storage. And certainly in being at Applied Materials in the solar space, that's, I think, interesting and something people like to talk about, but we're an equipment provider, and so I think there are a lot of lessons and similarities between Applied Materials today and Intel 20 years ago, before Intel was really a brand company and Intel thought downstream and did full. And so we're starting to bring some of those kind of historical learnings to Applied Materials and think about compressing industries and really making things go faster the way Andy talked about.
Okay, now I'm not going to do this linearly. I'm going to ask questions, and you're free to answer them as we go through. But for a lot of the folks here, I think they're thinking about going into a green tech area. Can you give them some advice in terms of what are a couple of things that you need to think about when you're moving from a non-green job into a job that sounds like it doesn't have a whole lot of revenue associated with it?
I'll go first. Since I've made the transition inside of a very blue company, my one piece of advice would be to take your champions as you find them. And you never know where they might be. And so I guess the story I'll tell, and John Antone was there about 1.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to present to Paul and executive staff on a proposal that was assigned to Sean. It got delegated down to me on a proposal for new green businesses that Intel should enter. And in the sales force, we have a BKM called Minesweeping, which is you go to the people who are going to be in the audience who might be your biggest critics and talk to them first in advance to find out where their head's at. So I went to Craig Barrett. And I said, Craig, I'm going to be presenting to MCM in a couple of weeks a proposal for new green businesses that we should enter. Do you have any suggestions? And he sort of did the Craig eye roll and said, first of all, I fundamentally don't believe that humans have anything to do with climate change. So that said, but then he was very helpful. He said, he says, however, if you do a Pareto of where all of the energy in the world is used and most wasted, it's in residential buildings. So if there's any way that we can help society learn how to harness microprocessors and computer-based controls for more effective, home energy management, that might be an interesting business opportunity for us. And of course, our team was already sort of heading down that path anyway. But it was great validation. following up Craig's advice, I found some research that absolutely supported his recollection of the data, and that was very useful in making a proposal that, some of you may have seen, we're continuing down this path at Intel of working with ISVs and other companies that are bringing home energy management technologies to market. So that'll be my advice: is take your allies as you find them, never who they might be.
It also looks like the advice might be to also find the money.
That's right, right. So again, the burden is never off to really justify the investment in a new business. So you still have to do your homework. But when you look at the stat Andy showed of $6 trillion energy industry, and the fact is that approximately half of the world's energy is wasted. So there's a $3 billion energy economic price tag for energy waste, and there's a lot of opportunity to figure out how to harness technology to eliminate different pieces of that waste. So there's a lot of money to be made there.
Cool. Anybody else that's in terms of transitioning from a non-green to a green tech?
I'd say if a company were coming and pitching to us, I'd be looking, if somebody came with a, call it traditional Intel background, I'd be looking for two things. The first is make sure there's someone on the team with some domain experience within the market segment that you're going after, because you're going to need somebody to partner with. I think that the things that you can talk about that would prevent, or the standard discipline and all of doing the right things right that we learned at Intel. And in particular, what we do at Exceed, a lot of our stuff is deep material science. So get brushed up on your chemistry and kind of what's happening. You got to kind of relearn a new set of language, a new set of tools. If it's been a while since you've studied chemistry, make sure you're back familiar with the terms and the language, because that's what the business is. There are business challenges as well, but the core science real early, that's where you need to focus.
So too bad that didn't work for us.
I mean, you took the advice, maybe some white work.
But we didn't come out of the national lab. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in that. But I think a lot of the skills at Intel played very well. First of all, I see this clean tech space as pretty much the Wild West. It's a huge number of small startups. All of them are trying different things in different ways, and it's really hard to know who the winners are going to be today. So certainly a large element of risk-taking is involved in making a jump into any one of these things, and obviously intelligent risk-taking is better than just foolish risk-taking. And then use those skills that you acquired, because I think a lot of these startups that I've had experience with, they're very much a science project, and it's almost, if we build it, they will come. And I think what Intel trains you a lot is it's about the ecosystem, it's about having the enabling partners, it's who are your co-travelers. That sort of bigger picture is often not seen. So I think aligning yourself with companies that understand that bigger picture is very important for success.
Let's dovetail about that. How else did you apply the Intel skills to this new green tech area? What works and perhaps what doesn't?
I'll speak up on that a little bit. We made at Intel, we made decisions we attempted to make decisions based on facts and argument and debate and discussion. And that's sorely missing in an awful lot of the entrepreneurs that come forth. And a lot of very glassy-eyed, starry-eyed, wishful thinking, and an absence of facts, an absence of data. The other thing, I think Chip hit right on it, you can't boil the ocean as a startup company. Intel, we created a category between Intel and Microsoft, and we were giant companies at that point in time, relatively speaking. And when you get into things like trying to create the electric car industry or something like that, you're not going to do that as a single startup company. These are really complicated things, and to kind of be aware of whether or not you're just coming in and you're substituting a simple material substitution into an existing market versus something that has to have a new market created, I think are pretty interesting differences that I see.
I think that a couple of you touched on the whole discipline and rigor that we all came from Intel. In the solar space specifically, there are a lot of startups like what Chip talked about, but there are also a lot of companies that have been at this for 10 or 15 years, sort of what Andy would characterize in that sort of phase 2 category. So the entire industry trying to leap to phase 3. And a lot of these guys have been working at this for 25 and 30 years. And they're not young starry-eyed guys, they're old starry-eyed guys. And yet they still lack discipline and some basic business sense and, speaking honestly and directly and still sort of wanting to take a constant leap of faith. And, there are a lot of people that are out there that have experience in the category, and they need to be matched with a lot of people that come from success, that know how to make that transition, which in and of itself isn't going to make that transition happen, but it's going to give those companies and those teams a heck of a lot more chance than they do just based on the content.
We've got a couple of you guys that are in the investment area, and might be able to provide advice for where are you? I mean, we've got a lot of areas with regard to green tech. Where would you put your time and money? Not so much as an investor investing cash, but as an investor perhaps investing your life, for the next 5, 10 years of your life. What part of the industry would you focus on? Where would it be safe? Well, I mean, why don't we try a range here? Because we've got a range. We've got people towards the end of their careers that probably want something perhaps a bit more secure and green, and we probably have people that are a little bit earlier in their careers that are willing to take some risks. Give us some flavors for where you would spend your time and personal equity in this market.
I would say that in this market and in these times, I'd be very cognizant of capital requirements of any business. And a lot of the energy business, the infrastructure, et cetera, is hugely capital intensive. And if a company's going to need $200 million, right, there are very few of those companies that are going to be funded today, either by the venture community or the public markets. I think there are certain areas that are underfunded. There are 7 billion thirsty people on the planet, and there are a lot of opportunities in the water space. I think water is currently underfunded. I think solar's been overfunded, and that'll just kind of go through a cycle. And similarly with biofuels. But I think that there are going to be opportunities, capital efficiency, at least in the near term, being a key thing to think about. And Rob, I'd push back. I don't think age has anything to do with an individual's risk profile. I think if somebody believes in what they're doing, you take a risk, whether you're 50 or 60 or whether you're 25. And so it comes down to what an individual wants to do with his or her life.
Actually, it may be inverse to age. So you have a lot more freedom to take risks.
When you're young.
A lot less road in front of you. It's interesting. The capital efficiency is an interesting thing, but the energy industry, $6 trillion energy industry, the total R&D spending, excluding hunts for new oil and new gas reserves, which they call development expenses in the oil companies, but the R&D investment for new energy sources and energy conservation is less than Intel's total R&D budget for a year, and Intel's a $40 billion company. There's another industry that's very similar to that, and that's the building industry. It's a $4 trillion industry, and the total R&D spending in the building industry for new materials last year was $500 million, not even $1 billion. There is an incredible opportunity in that space, and again, it's primarily a material substitution type of business. Capital efficiency is a very big ingredient, and the classic ways of delivering returns to your investors via an IPO and M&A, that model is likely to change to a different way out. And it's possible because unlike the chip industry and the semiconductor industry, every single dollar of revenue doesn't need to be poured back into R&D because, ATI is breathing down your neck or AMD is breathing down your neck for the next few decades. So you have some slightly different models, and I think being aware of that will allow you to formulate a business plan and a business model that has a high chance of getting financed.
So what do you guys think the next big thing in green is?
Well, I think Andy talked about it, Sharon's working on it. The electrification of transportation, I think, is just really essential. There's a lot of technology that's been trying to work its way out of the lab and become practical, and the last couple of years seem to be now making some of the big companies into gear, where Andy talked about you need somebody from the outside of the industry to do that. It seems like people inside the industry are now kind of motivated. From a government side, all it would take is a $4 a gallon tax on the darn thing, and that would just fix it right there. In Japan, we paid $6 a gallon. Hong Kong, we paid $8. There's a much greater need, but I think it's electrification of transportation, and the way you solve it is support the companies that are already just about there, and you support them by putting a big tax on it. That's politically but you want to solve problems, you get off oil pretty quick that way.
Yeah, I'm personally a big supporter of that, but I fear that these major infrastructure changes are just years and years away. And I absolutely believe we should be doing them, but I think an area that's been underfunded, and following on what John said, is just energy efficiency. 42% of the world's total energy, 42% of the world's total energy goes into building operations, heating, cooling, lighting, air conditioning. Now, addressing that is a huge opportunity to save energy, burn less coal, burn less oil. And that can be done with simple, low-tech technologies. A lot of it exists today, and it can employ lots of people to go do that. That's weather fitting, or weatherproofing, shades, simple stuff, insulation.
Glass, LEDs.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I would love to see more investment in that area. I'd love to see programs that really deploy those technologies that are on the shelf today, or soon to be on the shelf.
Enough research in universities and research labs in the type of technology that's relevant here, and the comparison that's in my mind is a $6 trillion industry. It's mostly about burning stuff. They're mostly heat engines. And the engineering work in universities on that goes back probably 100 years. There's been an enormous amount of research in it. And a lot of what you're talking about is either solid state work or chemical electric chemistry. And I just wonder, is even the research in the university world where it needs to be to make stuff that could be productizable?
I'll just jump in here. One of the things that excites me around your question is that a lot of the research has been done, a lot of the basic research and a lot of the basic invention. This is chemistry. It's, there's no new elements in the periodic table. A lot of this stuff is very well understood. It's a different application, a different way of doing it. And Intel makes small-scale computing affordable with the microprocessor. It was a different way of computing at that point in time, and now it's the only way of computing. One of our alumni in the back of the room is working on a very small-scale microchannel device that is basically a chemical refinery the size of your cell phone. And what's the beauty about that is you can dial in the yields. All the manufacturing people will love this. You can dial in the yields and get exactly the carbon molecule chain out of it you want, instead of this very broad distribution when it's done on large scale. So I think it's these examples of applying methods that weren't available in 1920 or 1904 or whatever, using today's technology and having a different scale paradigm that will create a tremendous amount of opportunities.
At the risk of disagreeing,
I'd like to answer your question with an example. One of the major problems that I did not talk about is removing carbon dioxide out of the process of burning coal and turning it into energy. It is a well-celebrated problem, mainly because the pilot plant, which would have been my phase 2 example there of how to do this, a $1 billion plant in Illinois, was canceled by the previous administration right at the beginning of the 8-year period. One of the more encouraging things that I've seen is the current energy secretary, who's a Nobel Prize winning physicist by coincidence, put that plan back on the map, and we'll see whether it happens or not, but that's not your question. Before that happened, Leslie and I went to visit the combustion engineering department at Stanford, trying to get an understanding of how good this stuff is. And we've talked with a professor who spent probably 25 to 30 years teaching combustion engineering, supervising graduate students, and he was utterly bored by the whole question. And he showed us a bookshelf, 6 feet, 8 feet, of volumes this thick, which are the symposia, annual symposia on combustion engineering of coal and carbon dioxide deal. And he says, that's not a new problem, this is solved. It was solved 20 years ago. And I said, but, nothing happened. He said, that's politics.
Now to go a step further, this is a major systemic problem. Let me tell you the next phase of this. I wanted to recruit some of the students to a seminar I teach at Stanford where one of the subjects is going to be carbon removal of coal and the issues in this country compared to China. I could not persuade any one of about 10 graduate students to come to that class.
Wow. Final question.
With that gloomy news, I got a final question. What advice would anybody on the board have for a brick and mortar business already in the energy business, but it's in the question mark stage? Not a seed. So what advice do you have for somebody who's there?
Gentlemen? When you say question mark phase, what do you mean?
Not a seed company.
Oh, I see. So, not question mark in terms of what you're going to be building, the question mark in terms of what phase. Yeah, I'm with you.
It's kind of hard to answer that question in a vacuum, right? Without knowing some of the context of the company, what you're making, what are your challenges in commercialization. But I think in this industry, somebody said it earlier, this is not one where any single small company can go at it alone. To figure out who are the fellow travelers you can bring along with you and see where you can get them to help you get to where you need to be commercially. This is not where someone's, I don't believe in the energy business. We haven't seen anything where somebody's going to become the next Google. This is something where somebody's going to bring a new technology, new product, new service, but you're still going to need a whole lot of people to go with it.
But to be clear, remember with Google, when people saw Google, it wasn't clear they were going to be the next Google. In fact, it was at the initial phase, they didn't have that words.
Who needs another search engine?
Yeah,
touche, but I'll put $1,000 bet to someone's charity of choice in the next 5 years. We're not going to see somebody with Google's market cap that comes from a startup to, in the energy business, something like that within the next 5 years. And that's.
We may not see something like that in any industry in the next 5 years. Yeah, but I hear you. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for attending.
Again, I want to thank the panel. Thank you so much. I think that was wonderful. I have to take care of a couple of housekeeping items briefly here. First of all, at the risk of stating the obvious, I would love to see you, to the extent you're interested, continue this conversation online on our online forum. So please think about, speak and tell us what you think. One question, by the way, is this particular topic a topic that we should cover again? I was just asked, how about we revisit this question in a year and same or similar people readdress the same question. I'm curious, how many people think that is an interesting topic? Wow. Oh, it was 1 year maybe too late? Is that one? Okay, let's see here. So next I would like to thank the panel, the group who put on this event, because in my humble opinion, they hit the ball out the park. Real quick, each of you, if you could wave to me, Dorit Perry, Stephen McKinnon, Pam Van Orden, James Tate, and John Raftree. He's not waving back there, but he's back there. Everybody knows John. And I also want to thank Stephen Darrow, who is very graciously doing the video. Well, both Stephen, well, two Steves are doing videoing back there.
And I'd like to thank Bruce Sheck.
Yeah.
For pulling the alumni network together and for being our guiding light. And I hope you're LED.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, well, a couple more things. Hang in there. as soon as we break you loose, just so you know, we're going to head to, those of you who are interested, are going to head to the Fault Line Brewery, and there are maps over there by the door. And as you walk out the door, please recycle your badge, because the Intel Alumni Network has gone green. So the recycling is right over there. And finally, we have small gifts for our, wait, no. The most important, I was saving her for last. Yeah. The most important person that you're going to clap for, darn, Stephen, take it away. Amazing job.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So Moni has picked out a green gift for each of our panelists. It's a power managed power slip.
John Rafferty said, I don't have one of these. These are cool. I think the panelists would like it. And it's supposed to turn off all of the appliances. So probably a lot of you already have them, but we thought maybe you ought to have one too. So thank you very much.
Okay, you're free.